the censor board would have definitely cut a lot of portion of what is readily available on OTT.
Yes.
Ironically, it is easier to regulate underage access to cinemas than it is to OTT content, because OTT content is so readily accessible on family gadgets, be it tablets or TVs, which are all logged on to using the family login credentials, making regulation on OTT platform and censorship even more necessary. I would like to view this, censorship of OTT content quite separately from what happened to Ranveer Allahbadia. I think we need to keep this separate, and keeping it separately, I do believe that censorship of content on OTT platforms is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, we're just looking at what could have been the government saying was a backlash that they received and a lot of requests from certain civic-minded people that we've had enough of this, it needs regulation because the digital sphere is not regulated at all. So whether you want to sort of, decouple it or not, that's immaterial. But the fact is that there has to be a certain degree of some amount of censure, some amount of filter. And Dr. Ranganathan, I just want to ask you this question because, we've had these conversations earlier. And this is important. Should we codify to ensure against, arbitrary decision making? Look, there are laws and, they're loosely worded and interpreted. So it's perhaps good that you have a certain codified set of red lines so that we don't have a problem. No one is banning creativity, but only setting guidelines so that perverted filth doesn't masquerade as content available to impressionable minds. That's all. What's wrong with that, number one? And number two, most importantly, and this is something that perhaps we can look at, this filth for profit, this isn't entertainment in my book. It's a business model. Now, why should anyone object to its regulation? If it's not, for a higher purpose, which is alleviating the human condition, etc., and if it is only filth generated for profit, then I'm sorry, but there's a problem here.
A couple of points, Rahul, for a change. I think you're going to like what I say here tonight, because despite my being a free speech absolutist, that argument doesn't come into this discussion at all. Yeah. So yes, I am a free speech absolutist, but this is about content regulation, and I am all for it, because although I am against a censor board, I don't want anything censored, but I want things to be certified, whether it is a material for adult usage or consumption or for children, and that has to be done in any reasonable, logical, rational society. So yes, there has to be some regulation to certify whether a material is to be consumed only by adults or by children. Now, the second point, and which is also important because you mentioned it very briefly, you talked about, for example, you said something filthy, whether it needs to be regulated.
Filth for profit.
Or,
the model,
filth
the business model.
Right.
So it works. Right. It works very simply. The more the filthy stuff you put in, the more provocation it leads to. That leads to a controversy. Controversy attracts eyeballs. Good, bad, the ugly. No one cares. At the end of the day, because of the likes, the hates, or whatever it is, the views, you make money.
So again, I mean, if that is regulated, if that is specifically targeted for adult consumption, I don't find anything wrong with it, because who's to say what is wrong and what is right, in the sense, I'm not about to irritate you again, but I'm just making an argument here, because gambling is also banned. Now you can say gambling is filth for profit. It should be banned because it corrupts people. Drinking, so who draws that line again is an argument. As long as I'm not asking for drawing that line, I'm just saying you say whatever you want, but then you certify who is to consume it, and that's important. Because our kids must not be exposed to, for example, pornography, but adults can be.
Yeah, Shubhrashtra.
Yes. So Rahul, see, comedy often pushes norms define what humor, information, incitement to violence, etc. Now, in the particular case of Samay Raina and Ranveer Allahbadia, let's remember that the limits on comedy vary by culture, legal frameworks, and platform policies. If the government is willing to come up with certain platform policies, I don't think one should have an issue. I don't see where the debate really is. Because in the larger interest of limiting the conversation in our culture, and it may come with a lot of riders, it's not like we do not entertain comedy with respect to body jokes, with respect to jokes with respect to sexuality, but they happen on different platforms. I mean, I come from Bihar, so UP, Bihar, the whole North Indian belt, the kind of body songs that are sung during during certain marriage festivals, etc. Women cross all limits of general decency, but that happens in a particular context. It doesn't happen out in the open in front of the entire village. There's a specific space where one is allowed to celebrate this kind of nudity and absolute rivalry also, revelry in that sense. My problem is the way in which Samay, and as you rightly said, filth for profit. The problem is with that. And if you are ready to commercialize that model, then be ready for certain commercial regulations. I don't see I don't see why. Yeah,
Advaita Kala, just to get a sense.
Well, I am all for certification. I think censor is a frightening word for any creative person. So there is definitely a space for certification. And the other thing is, Anand, Rahul, I keep saying Anand, the thing is...
Dr. Anand Ranganathan is an overbearing personality.
I know,
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead, yes.
Rahul, but the thing is that... I don't think that the INB ministry is really cracking the whip, because if you read their order, what they're saying once more is that your self-regulatory mechanism must come into play and must refer to the Indian Penal Code and the Ethics Code and then take these decisions. That's not working. Haven't they figured it out by now? That's not working. So what's the next step? And before we get into this position where we again set off a narrative of, the quelling of creative freedom, etc., and that whole thing, free speech, and, the usual kind of issues that become big, explosive kind of to and fro's, I think it's important that the INB ministry take a stand. They've given this warning before. It's not worked. You still have content on OTTs where bhabis are having affairs, and this is a whole genre, Rahul. It's not just one show. It's a whole genre of shows. And it's still going on, which practically, it makes a mockery of the traditional fabric of this country. So we have to have the INB ministry now come down with a plan of action.
No, but Advaita Kala, you're suggesting that if someone makes a series like that, and I think you're referring to a particular production company that excels in all of this.
Even an OTT.
So what would you do? Would you then censor the content? Would you ask for cuts? How would you do it? Or would you just say it's certified and say that only people above 18 should watch it? Because then if you then get into the other game, then there's problems.
There are lots of, just like you subsidize certain types of films, in the same way, this kind of content should also be made at a higher cost, number one. Number two, there are many mechanisms that the government has, costs, taxations, accessibility. These are all tools that government has at hand that it can use to discourage this kind of content without going completely kind of,
the problem is that when you talk about applying tools, then you talk about persuasion. Persuasion means that a government can then have the space to be overbearing, and then there'll be people who say that, look, the government is stepping on toes, etc. Exactly. Yes, Dr. Ranganath, 30 seconds, and I want to...
why they're going on and on with the warnings.
I couldn't hear a word of what Advaita said. If it was Sanjay Jaju, I would have loved it. It would have been a relief, but I love Advaita. So please tell me what she said, because it's complete. I couldn't hear anything.
Okay. Well, look, the fact of the matter is, viewers, fundamentally, there is an issue right now with the manner in which you're going to bring digital media under control. The trouble is that there are many laws, but each of them, if you apply them, it will lead to a subjective interpretation, which many people then begin to fear. So one doesn't quite understand how this is going to happen. Maybe it's beyond the government. I don't know, viewers. Maybe it'll be left to all of us, and maybe us at the end, the viewer. Maybe we should vote without watching. And maybe that will be one way of sorting it out. As of now, viewers, if Filth for Profit is off the airs, then I don't know how that group on your screen, those 4 or 5 people are going to continue to be relevant. I'll leave it at this. Vantage coming up with Palki Sharma, viewers next.